Hello, welcome to my channel. Here's a drawing of two famous actors, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, in the movie The Godfather. I used a combination of pencils for this one. I used a combination of graphite and a black colored pencil. The black colored pencil is a Faber-Castell Polychromos black colored pencil, and the graphite pencil is the Staedtler's HB pencil. For larger, darker areas, I also used vine charcoal because it's easy to blend. So this is a mixed media drawing. I also used a Kohinoor pencil eraser for erasing and a kneaded eraser as well. And for blending, I used some of the usual blending tools, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Let's get to it. A few words about the paper before I move on to commenting on the drawing process. I'm doing this on Strathmore drawing paper, and the original size of the paper was I think 11 times 14 inches, but I cropped it a little bit because this is a commissioned drawing and my customer requested a slightly smaller drawing. So I adjusted it to a custom size paper. But anyway, this is Strathmore paper, which I found was pretty good with graphite. With charcoal, not so much. With graphite and colored pencils, it really does pretty well. But here, as you can see, I started working on Al Pacino's hair, and because it's a larger area that I need to cover with dark value, I just used some vine charcoal to cover that quickly. And then I moved in with a black colored pencil and I refined some of the details in the texture because the hair is slicked back and I'm trying to imitate that look. And I did that by trying to follow the direction of the hair, the direction in which the hair is slicked back. But I also left some lighter areas for the highlights. I may go in with a pencil eraser a little bit later and refine some of those highlights. So that the hair looks more shiny in those areas. Anyway, like I said, the paper is about 10 times 12 inches in size. This was a second attempt at a drawing of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro because the first one was based on reference photo that I wasn't really happy with. The resolution was kind of small and the lighting wasn't great, even though the composition was kind of interesting, but it wasn't going well. I wasn't happy with the way Al Pacino's face turned out, so I decided to throw it away and then agreed to a different reference photo with my customer, and this one did fine. The faces were slightly larger here, which suited me well because when the face is too small and the reference photo is low res, it's kind of difficult to achieve likeness. There are always some distortions and things like that, so I decided to work on a slightly larger format, slightly larger portraits. So this is a double portrait with some of their bodies visible, so I'm going to be working on their clothes as well, and I'm going to cover most of the clothes with that vine charcoal because there are a lot of these darker areas which I can't really do with a black colored pencil because it just doesn't blend very well. Now I want to say a few words about this combination of pencils that I'm using. I like to use a combination of graphite and a black colored pencil. Some people ask me why I don't use graphite pencils exclusively, because I could probably do the same thing or a similar thing with an 8B or some other softer or darker graphite pencil. That's true, I could do that, but I just prefer a black colored pencil for a couple of reasons. First, it allows me to work with fewer pencils. And the second reason is it's hardly reflective at all. It's not reflective, unlike graphite. With graphite, the softer the pencil, the more reflective it is, and I don't really like that, and it would be a bit of a problem when you're working with artificial light when you're recording a drawing. So some of the values would be slightly off. And I guess graphite is okay, it has some of its advantages, but I just like to use a combination of a graphite pencil and a black colored pencil. So I use a black colored pencil as I would a softer graphite pencil. I use this graphite pencil for most of the shading on the face. It's like my all-around pencil, and I use it for most of the basic tones, and then I go over it in some areas with a black colored pencil, and I also draw some of the details, some of the darker details, like for example the eyes and the eyebrows and the hair, with a black colored pencil. But the thing is that I have to keep sharpening the black colored pencil to avoid producing too much texture and to make sure that my lines are clean. But the Faber-Castell colored pencils are really great quality. I mean, they can be sharpened without any problems, and they hold the tip pretty well. I'm not a big fan of colored pencils, but I do like using this combination. And when I work in color, I tend to use mixed media. Also, I tend to combine colored pencils with pastels. I left the eye on the right. I still need to do that. That's one of the probably bad habits that I have. I start with one eye and then I move on to other parts of the face, even though I should probably work on both eyes at the same time in order to avoid any distortions or lack of symmetry. But I often just start on one eye and then move on to something else and then finish the eye later. I'm not saying I always do that, but I often do that. I've done that even when I was a beginner, and I still sometimes have that habit. I don't know why, but it is what it is. So the Al Pacino's face is progressing pretty nicely. I'm just putting in some more details and refining the facial features and adding in some more textures. One of the things I regret is that the camera doesn't really capture the amount of detail and texture on the drawing. When you look at it in real life, these drawings are far more detailed, and that's one of the, if you want to call it, disadvantages of graphite pencils. I worked in graphite pencils for a very long time, for many years, and I've always noticed that my photos and recordings, they were never as good as the real thing. My customers would always be surprised at the level of detail and texture. They always looked better in real life. With charcoal, I think because the drawings tend to be a little bit less detailed, there's a little less of those small details and textures. The camera captures the level of detail better. So I'm using a pencil eraser to pull some of the highlights to emphasize the shape of the face, to make it look more 3D. Because the more range of value I have between the lighter and darker areas, the better I can describe the shape of the face. I put in a highlight on the nose and on the forehead and on the chin, and just try to make some of those areas stand out, and I'm pretty happy with the way Al Pacino's face turned out. So I'm going to be moving on to the jacket and the shirt. The collar is going to require some very light shading because it's white, but then we're going to have a grayish tie with some pattern. I'm not really sure what it is, but it kind of looks like dots or something. And the rest of the jacket is going to be pretty dark with very little detail. But instead of doing Al Pacino's clothes, I decided to move on to Robert De Niro's portrait because that's what I found more interesting at the time, I guess. He also has slicked back hair, so I'm gonna use the same approach. With hair, whether you're drawing animal hair or human hair, the approach is always the same. You have to make sure that your strokes match the length of the hair, and that the direction of your strokes also matches the direction in which the hair is slicked back or combed or grows. So that even when you start blending it, you get the texture right. I'm working on the eyes using a black colored pencil because these details are a little bit darker. And I'm leaving a small reflection in the eyes. I don't know how much you'll be able to pick up on those tones, but I did shade the whites of the eyes on Al Pacino, especially the corners of the eyes, because the eyes are round objects, so I have to shade them as a sphere. So the corners of the eyes are just a little bit darker, and then they get lighter towards the middle. And also another reason why I shade the entire eyeball is so that the reflection would stand out a little bit more. So both of these actors have very interesting faces, and it's very important for me to capture every detail correctly, so that the eyes and the nose and the mouth, so that everything looks perfect. And that's one of the reasons why I wasn't happy with the first attempt. I just wanted the drawing to look really good. I'm not a great fan of these actors, by the way. I haven't really seen too many of their movies, honestly, and I've never seen The Godfather, either of them. I know that some people would be surprised at that, but I've never seen it. And honestly, I'm not really fascinated by those mafia type crime movies that kind of have criminals as main protagonists. I was never really into that. I know that some men really find this genre fascinating, but I don't really like it. So I've never seen the movie, and honestly I haven't seen that many movies by these two actors. I've seen Scarface, and I thought it was a good movie, but it's not. I don't really understand why it reached cult status. So, like I said, it's a commission, and I'm just trying to do the best that I can. Both of them have pretty strong facial hair. So even when they're clean shaven, you can see traces of some facial hair around the mustache and the beard. So that's why I'm going over those areas, holding my pencil sideways to produce a little more texture, to imitate the appearance of the skin in those areas. And I'm paying particular attention to the area in between the eyes and this transition between the eyebrows and the nose, because I often tend to make noses a little bit too wide, especially that area near the eyes. So both of these actors have somewhat larger noses, which is kind of working for me in this particular case, because I tend to make noses a little bit larger anyway, but I don't want to make them too large. And now I'm doing the same thing with Robert Deniro's hair that I did with Al Pacino's. I'm just using a little bit of vine charcoal and spreading that with a brush, because it's just a quick way of covering a larger area with some darker value. And I can also control the amount of value by taking away a little bit of the value or putting in a little bit more. And then I can just go over it with a black colored pencil and refine the details and that slicked appearance of the hair. I'm also pretty happy with the shape that I got, the shape of the head and the hair, and Both Robert De Niro's face and Al Pacino's face also look pretty good. Robert De Niro's portrait is coming along nicely, so I will be moving on to the clothes pretty soon. I just need to shade the right side of the face a little bit more, because that side of the face is a little bit darker, and I'll also need to use a pencil eraser to clean up some of the highlights, again to emphasize the topography of the face. So like I said, I'm using a pencil eraser to clean up some of the highlights, to make some of the areas a little bit lighter, like on the nose and on the forehead, and also cleaning up some of the edges, because I want a clean edge around their face. It's very important to have a clean edge there. And I'm just refining the appearance of the hair a little bit, using a brush again, and then going over it again with some black colored pencil. And pulling some highlights in the hair using a pencil eraser, but not too much. I don't want to overdo it. I also need to make sure that eyebrows are thick enough. So now I'm going to be moving on to the clothes, and because like I said, I have a larger dark area here, because his jacket is mostly very dark. I'm not really sure if it's exactly black, but it doesn't really matter. So because it's a larger dark area, I'm just going to use some vine charcoal to cover that very quickly. Yeah, I could do that with graphite or with a black colored pencil, but it would be a lot slower, and I would be producing a little bit too much texture, and I don't really like that. I like the fact that I can blend this pretty smoothly and quickly. So I'm just going to use that vine charcoal as a base dark tone, and then go over it with a black colored pencil and refine the overall appearance, adding in some of the darker areas and maybe some lighter areas, again using my erasers. But I'm going to be doing some more blending on top of that, because I want to remove any texture that I create with a black colored pencil. So I went over this part a little bit faster, because I was mostly interested in the portrait, and I'm sure that you are as well. So this part of the time lapse is a little bit faster. And here's the tie, which is a little bit lighter in color and has some dots or something. So I'm just trying to imitate roughly what I see in the reference photo, even though when it comes to clothes I always tend to simplify things, because I always want the faces to be the focus of my drawings or the portraits, and I try to make the clothes realistic, but I try not to put in too much details into them, because I don't want them to be too distracting, and I don't want to get into something that would take away too much of my time and energy, and possibly not end up looking too good, because I think it just looks better when you simplify it a little bit, especially if your reference photo is a little bit darker in some places and you can't make out all of the details. So you can just improvise and simplify a little bit. So Robert De Niro is wearing some kind of a vest, and the shirt is of a little bit lighter color, but it's not going to remain that light. I did all of this with an HB graphite pencil, but I'm going to add in some darker areas using vine charcoal and a black colored pencil, just to emphasize some of these folds in that shirt and give it more shape. So now I'm going over these folds with a black colored pencil and just deepening some of the shadows in between them, and later I may use a pencil eraser to refine the raised parts or the highlights on that shirt. Also in my reference photo, these two were a little bit wider apart, so I kind of bunched them together a little bit, and Deniro looked a lot taller than Al Pacino, so I kind of modified that as well because I didn't want that much of a height difference there. And I'm just now working on the shirt and the collar and this vest, making it a little bit darker using a black colored pencil and making everything smoother using a brush. As you can see, brushes were my main blending tools here, even though I used tortillons and Q-tips as well. The vest also has some kind of stripes, so I pulled those with a pencil eraser. And I'm going to do this the same thing on the lower part of the vest. And I covered that initially with some vine charcoal, and then I blended it a little bit, and then I went over it with a black colored pencil to add a little more value and to add some shadows and to add some of these folds. A shadow under the arms, and to add a little more value, but I don't want to make it too dark because all of this is a vignette, so the lower part of their bodies is kind of fading towards the bottom of the paper. And here the drawing is almost done, and all I have left is to clean up some of the edges and maybe emphasize some of these shadows, and the drawing is pretty much done. I just have to decide where to sign it. I'm also cleaning up the edges a little bit. I've already done a lot of cleaning up, but I like to do the cleaning with the kneaded eraser because it doesn't leave any residue. But for these edges, sometimes a pencil eraser is a more convenient tool, adding a touch more value to the ear. And I'm cleaning up a little bit, so the drawing is now finished. I could sign it on the left or on the right. I decided to sign it on the right, maybe that way it will look a little more balanced. I don't know. Either way is fine, I guess, here. So that's the finished drawing. I'm going to move it around a little bit so that you can have another look at it and maybe zoom in a little bit. So I zoomed in a little bit so that you can see their faces are a little bit better. So you can see I did a lot of shading on this format, which is not too large. And I zoomed out again so that you can see what the whole drawing looks like. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe, and check out my other videos. Thank you for watching, and bye.